This is it. We are standing on Noah's Ark. If this was a natural rock formation, a jagged regular shape, or a jumble of just little rocks and boulders, instead you actually see the boundaries of the boat.
What if one of the greatest stories ever told is not just faith, but history waiting to be uncovered? For centuries, the account of Noah's Ark has sparked curiosity, debate, and wonder.
Says the dimensions match. He has fresh evidence. Working with a local professor to look beneath the surface after several teams scanned the site.
Now, deep in the mountains of Turkey, a mysterious discovery is making people question everything they thought they knew. Could this be real evidence of the Ark? And how does it connect to the warnings of Jesus Christ? What was found inside may surprise you and challenge what you believe. So join us in this video as we reveal the details. The first breach. What was never meant to be opened. The moment the team drilled a thin micro-burrow hole into the sealed chamber, everything changed. The atmosphere inside the field lab grew tense, almost heavy, as if everyone present could feel the weight of what they were about to uncover. This was no ordinary step. For the first time, human hands had reached into a hidden part of the buried structure. No one spoke, but the seriousness of the moment was written on every face. The probe slid in more easily than expected. That alone raised concern. The outer layer of the structure felt far stronger than normal wood, denser, almost unnatural. Engineers exchanged quick glances, but before anyone could speak, the radiation detector on the main console began to react. At first, it was subtle, green. Then, within seconds, the screen shifted to yellow and then orange. That change meant one thing. Radiation levels were rising beyond anything considered normal. The room fell silent. These warnings didn't happen by accident. The detector was picking up energy levels that simply should not exist in a buried wooden structure. Wood does not emit radiation. It never has. It never should. Yet the numbers kept climbing. The team froze, eyes locked on the screen. Something inside that chamber was producing energy, something that had no clear or natural explanation. From the overhead imaging feed, the structure became clearer. But the radiation wasn't the only anomaly. A second instrument began displaying something even more unsettling. The internal air pressure inside the chamber was not stable. Instead, it moved in a slow, steady rhythm, rising, then falling over and over again. It wasn't random. It was consistent. Mechanical systems could cause fluctuations like that, but this chamber was completely sealed. There were no moving parts, no airflow systems, nothing that could explain such behavior. One engineer leaned closer to the screen, studying the pattern, then whispered something no one wanted to hear. "It looks like breathing." The word hung in the air. No one responded. No one wanted to give that thought any life. Instead, they checked the instruments again and again, hoping for an error. But every test returned the same result. The pattern didn't change. Then came the chemical analysis. When the probe sent back its findings, the tension in the room only deepened. The chamber walls were coated in a thick black substance, sticky, heavy, and unmistakable. It resembled ancient pitch, the same material described in Genesis 6:14, where Noah was instructed to cover the ark inside and out. At first, that seemed like confirmation, but the details told a different story. This pitch wasn't ordinary. Mixed within it were traces of ash and strange crystalline particles that did not match any known minerals in the region. Under microscopic examination, the crystals revealed something even more disturbing. Their structure appeared organized, almost as if they had been engineered rather than formed naturally. That discovery alone raised questions no one could answer. One member of the team, familiar with ancient Hebrew texts, spoke up. He explained that the word used for pitch in Genesis carried a deeper meaning. It wasn't just about sealing wood, it was also the same word used later in Scripture for atonement, a covering, a protective seal, something meant to contain, to shield, prevent negative impact or judgment from spreading. The room grew quiet again, but this time for a different reason. The implication was impossible to ignore. What if this chamber had not been sealed simply to keep water out during the flood? What if it had been sealed to keep something in? That thought changed everything. As the team continued scanning, the full shape of the chamber came into view, and it sent a wave of unease through everyone present. This was no storage room. It wasn't built to hold animals or supplies. It was long, narrow, measured. It matched the proportions of an ancient sarcophagus, designed for a single occupant, a tomb, or a prison. At that moment, the entire purpose of the structure came into question. If even one chamber had been built this way, then the Ark may have served a role far beyond survival. And then, just as the team struggled to process this, the scan expanded further. A small side cavity appeared beside the chamber. Inside it were objects, solid, physical artifacts. But they didn't resemble bones. They didn't resemble tools, and they certainly didn't match the remains of any known animal. No one said it out loud, but the feeling was shared by all. Whatever they were uncovering was only just beginning. So, what next did they find inside that changed everything? Keep watching to find out. The Tunnel of Bones. Evidence of something forbidden. The team expected the narrow adjoining tunnel to be filled with soil, broken wood, or the usual signs of collapse. That would have made sense. But the moment the first lights were lowered into the space, everything changed. The room went completely silent. Lying across the floor were bones. Not scattered randomly, not buried in debris, but arranged, carefully, deliberately. At first glance, it was clear these were not the remains of any known animal. The positioning alone raised concern. The bones had been stacked in a way that didn't match any natural process. This wasn't the result of a collapse or erosion. Someone, or something, had placed them there. One of the researchers leaned closer to the live feed and spoke under his breath. He said it didn't look like a random pile at all. It looked controlled, contained, almost like a quarantine site. That single observation shifted the mood instantly. As the team began a closer examination, the details became harder to ignore. The structure of the bones didn't match anything familiar. The rib cage was the first sign that something was wrong. The ribs were packed far too tightly together. In a normal animal, there has to be enough space for the lungs to expand. But here, the spacing was so narrow that proper breathing would have been impossible, at least for anything living in today's world. Then came the jaw. At first, it appeared reptilian, but even that comparison didn't fully fit. The hinge structure was unlike anything documented. It had a double joint, which meant the mouth could open far wider than normal. And the teeth, they followed a strange pattern. Long, short, alternating in a way not seen in any modern species. It didn't stop there. The spine told an even stranger story. Instead of forming a straight line like most animals, the vertebrae twisted into a spiral shape, not slightly curved, fully spiraled. There was no known creature with that kind of structure. It defied everything the team understood about biology. Carefully, the researchers used a remote mechanical arm to retrieve small fragments. The tunnel was too narrow for direct access, so every movement had to be precise. Each piece was placed into sterile containers and immediately prepared for testing. They didn't waste time. Portable sequencing equipment was set up, and DNA analysis began right there on site. The team gathered around as the machine processed the samples. No one spoke. Everyone waited. Then the results appeared. And just like before, the room fell still. The system had detected genetic sequences, but none of them matched anything in the global DNA database. Not mammals, not reptiles, not birds, nothing. The samples were flagged as unknown. A geneticist reviewed the data, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. He explained, as simply as he could, that this meant one of two things. Either the creature came from a completely extinct line that had never been recorded, or it belonged to something that existed before the flood. Something that didn't survive into the modern world. That idea alone was enough to unsettle everyone present. But then, a biblical scholar quietly spoke up. He referenced a passage from the book of Genesis, specifically Genesis 6:4. In simple terms, he explained that the verse describes beings that once existed on the earth that were not ordinary. They were not fully human, and they were not normal animals. According to the text, they were the result of corruption, of mixing that was never meant to happen. The word used in the passage is often translated as Nephilim. The room grew heavier as the meaning settled in. If such beings had truly existed, then they would not have been part of the animals Noah was commanded to save. They wouldn't have been allowed to continue after the flood. Instead, they would have been separated, contained, removed. Suddenly, the arrangement of the bones didn't feel random at all. It felt intentional, as if someone had made sure these remains were isolated, kept away from everything else. Then the team noticed something else. Along the wooden walls of the tunnel were deep claw marks. At first, they looked chaotic, but a closer inspection revealed a pattern. Every single mark pointed inward, not outward. Whatever had been in that tunnel hadn't been trying to break into the Ark. It had been trying to resist being pushed further inside. That realization sent a chill through the entire team. The idea that something had fought against confinement inside the Ark itself was deeply unsettling. Still, they pressed on, following the tunnel deeper, past the claw marks and the stacked remains. The researchers moved closer to whatever lay ahead, and what they were about to find would be even harder to explain. So, what came next? Let's find out. The Forbidden Writings, a warning carved in the Ark. As the team moved deeper, the narrow tunnel slowly began to widen. The air felt heavier, and every step forward seemed to carry more tension than the last. Then, without warning, the beam of the first flashlight passed over something that made everyone stop instantly. The wall was not plain wood. It was covered. Every surface along the corridor had been coated in a hardened, resin-like pitch, and pressed into that surface were carvings, not random marks, not damage from time. These were deliberate, structured. It was writing. At first glance, the symbols looked similar to very early forms of ancient script, something like Proto-Sinaitic writing. But as the team examined it more closely, the differences became impossible to ignore. The shapes didn't match any known alphabet. The patterns didn't follow any recorded linguistic system. A linguist stepped forward, studying the markings in silence. Then he spoke, carefully choosing his words. He said the script looked older than anything ever discovered in the ancient Near East, older than known civilizations, older, possibly, than the time when human language itself was divided. Another researcher quietly reflected on the timeline. The story of Noah's Ark is recorded in Genesis.
The story of Noah's Ark is told in the biblical book of Genesis. After God creates the universe and mankind begins with Adam and Eve, they go on to populate the earth. 10 generations later, Noah's born.
Long before the event known as the Tower of Babel, when, according to the Bible, human language was separated. If that were true, then this writing could belong to a time when the entire world spoke one shared language, a language now lost. The team began documenting everything. Every symbol was scanned, recorded, and digitally enhanced. It took time, but slowly, patterns began to emerge. Repeated phrases, recognizable structures, and then, meaning. The first translated phrase appeared on the screen, "Bind the corrupted." No one spoke. Moments later, a second phrase followed, "Seal them for the fire." The tension in the tunnel deepened, but it was the third phrase that changed everything. "Do not open until the end of days." A wave of silence passed through the group. These were not instructions for building. They were warnings, clear, direct, and urgent. And they all pointed to one idea. Something had been contained inside this structure, something dangerous. This discovery shattered the familiar image of Noah's Ark. It was no longer just a place of rescue, filled with animals waiting out the flood. The inscriptions told a very different story, one of the restraints, of containment, of something that was never meant to be released. The implication was simple, but deeply unsettling. Noah didn't just preserve life. He may have been commanded to imprison it. A biblical scholar standing with the team spoke up, referencing a passage from the New Testament, 2 Peter 2:4. In simple terms, it describes how certain beings who had sinned were cast into darkness and held there until a future judgment. He explained that in early Jewish and Christian writings, there are accounts of beings, possibly connected to the figures mentioned in Genesis 6:4, that were not destroyed immediately, but instead confined, held back, reserved, waiting. The wording of the carvings matched that idea with chilling accuracy. If this interpretation were correct, then Noah's mission may have involved more than survival. It may have included obedience to a command to seal away corrupted beings in specific parts of the Ark. Then, the team noticed something else. Among the carvings were crude diagrams, simple but intentional. They looked like maps, layouts of the structure itself, markings that pointed to specific locations within the Ark. When these sketches were compared to the team's earlier scans, the result was undeniable. They matched exactly. One marked area stood out above the rest, a large, clearly defined section, and when they overlaid it with their data, it aligned perfectly with the chamber they had already discovered. The same chamber that showed abnormal radiation, the same one with shifting internal pressure, and that disturbing, rhythmic pattern. The realization settled heavily over the group. Noah himself may have marked that location, as if to warn anyone who might one day find it. The deeper the team went, the more intense the carvings became. Some lines were cut deeply into the hardened pitch, as if carved with force. Others looked rushed, uneven, almost desperate. It was clear that whoever made them was not just recording information. They were trying to warn, trying to make sure the message would never be ignored, because opening what had been sealed would not end well. Then, as the tunnel opened into a wider corridor, the team saw something that stopped them cold. Ahead of them stood a massive door, reinforced. Unlike anything else they had seen so far, it was embedded deep within the structure, stronger, thicker, and clearly designed to hold something back. And in that moment, one thought became impossible to escape. Whatever was behind that door was something Noah feared more than the flood itself. But how was the Ark discovered after centuries? Keep watching to find out. The discovery that sparked global debate. The story truly exploded the moment it reached the headlines. Suddenly, it wasn't just whispers or fringe discussions anymore. Major outlets began reporting. 3D scans show a boat-like formation matching the biblical description of Noah's Ark. For many, it sounded almost unreal, like something you'd hear on a late-night documentary, not something presented as serious research in mainstream news. And yet, there it was. Scientists, using advanced ground-penetrating radar, had scanned deep beneath the surface in eastern Turkey. What they found wasn't just vaguely shaped like a ship. The images revealed something far more structured: parallel lines, sharp right angles, and long uniform sections that looked anything but random. Even more surprisingly, these features closely matched the dimensions described in ancient biblical texts. It raised a question people had been asking for generations. Could this really be it? Had someone actually found Noah's Ark? For centuries, the idea of a massive ancient vessel resting somewhere near Mount Ararat existed in a strange space between myth and mystery. Locals told stories passed down through generations. Explorers spoke quietly about strange formations, beams, and buried shapes. But to most people, the Ark was just that, a story, something symbolic, something distant, not something real. But everything began to shift when a group of modern researchers decided to approach the mystery differently. Instead of dismissing the stories as folklore, they chose to treat them as data, clues worth investigating with the tools of modern science. The location they focused on was no easy destination. Mount Tendurek, part of the rugged volcanic region near the more well-known Mount Ararat, is not a place for casual exploration. The terrain is harsh, dry, and jagged. It's the kind of landscape where something could remain hidden for thousands of years without ever being disturbed. From above, however, something stood out. Old aerial photographs, some dating back decades, revealed a distinct shape carved into the land. It wasn't just roughly oval, it was strikingly precise. A long, smooth outline that resembled the hull of a massive ship, as if something enormous had settled into the earth and slowly fused with it over time. Locals had known about this formation for generations. They pointed to it as something ancient, something always there. According to them, even their great-grandparents had spoken about the same shape. Eventually, the site gained a name, the Durupinar site. At first glance, it looked like a natural ridge stretching over 500 feet in length. But that measurement alone was enough to catch attention. It closely matched the size described in ancient texts. Not perfectly, but close enough to make people pause and wonder. Still, curiosity alone wasn't enough to prove anything, so the researchers came prepared. Unlike early explorers who relied on basic tools and guesswork, this team arrived with advanced technology, equipment capable of seeing beneath the surface without disturbing it. Ground-penetrating radar, 3D subsurface imaging, and detailed scanning tools allowed them to read the Earth like layers in a book. Before this, the site had been visited by scientists, but earlier technology had its limits. Many findings were dismissed or left inconclusive. But now, things were different. When the team began scanning the formation, they expected to see randomness. But what appeared on their screens told a different story. Straight lines, defined angles, layered sections stacked in ways that resembled floors, compartment-like divisions. It didn't look natural. It looked designed. And then came something even more striking. The internal measurements within the formation lined up, almost eerily, with the proportions described in ancient accounts of the Ark. Not exact, but close enough to raise more than a few eyebrows. And heart rates. The team didn't stop there. They collected soil samples from both inside and outside the formation. The results added another layer of mystery. The soil within the structure contained higher levels of organic material, traces that suggested something living had once been there. It wasn't the same as the surrounding ground, not even close. Mineral compositions differed. Plant life growing directly above the formation showed subtle but noticeable differences compared to vegetation just a short distance away. It was as if the ground itself carried a memory of something buried beneath it. Then there were the stones. Scattered around the site were large, heavy slabs of rock, each with a hole carved near the top. Their purpose wasn't immediately clear, but some believed they could have been used as anchors or stabilizing weights, tools for holding a massive structure steady against powerful forces. No one could say for certain who made them or when, but locals insisted they had always been there. Stories continued to surface, passed down through families living in the area. Accounts of strange objects uncovered after heavy storms, pieces of petrified wood found high in the mountains, odd, iron-like streaks embedded in the soil. None of it proved anything on its own, but together they painted a picture that was hard to ignore. Over the years, different explorers claimed to have found fragments, long, flat sections resembling wooden planks, and even metallic remnants that hinted at some form of reinforcement. Many of these claims were debated, challenged, and sometimes dismissed entirely. But they never fully disappeared. Instead, they kept the mystery alive. Eventually, the significance of the site drew the attention of the Turkish government. The area was designated as a protected national park, not because it had been confirmed as Noah's Ark, but because of its cultural and historical importance. Still, the biggest breakthrough came when researchers decided to go further than anyone before. They began drilling, carefully, strategically. Specialized cameras were lowered into narrow openings beneath the surface. At first, the team expected darkness, just soil, rock, nothing unusual. But what the cameras revealed changed everything. Inside the shadowed spaces were patterns, clear, repeating structures, sharp-edged cavities, divisions that looked like rooms or compartments. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't random. It looked organized, intentional, designed. Even then, the scientists remained cautious. They avoided dramatic conclusions. They emphasized the need for more testing, more data, more confirmation. No one was ready to declare anything with certainty. But the questions only grew louder. The formation didn't behave like ordinary rock. The soil didn't act like typical soil. And what lay beneath didn't resemble a natural accident. Something was there, something structured, something unexpected. And perhaps most surprising of all, the team that reignited global interest wasn't the first to make such claims. The world reacted with shock, but one man had seen it coming. The man who chased the Ark.
We believe that God has preserved in the earth and under the seas remains of the major events discussed in the Bible. Physical remains, chemical remains.
If you were to picture an ordinary person suddenly deciding to chase one of the greatest mysteries in the Bible, you'd probably imagine someone like Ron Wyatt. By profession, he wasn't an archaeologist, historian, or academic expert. He was a nurse anesthetist from Tennessee. But to many who followed his journey, he became something far more: God's archaeologist. A man driven by a deep curiosity that carried him across deserts, mountains, and ancient lands for more than 20 years. Wyatt's journey didn't begin in a lab or a university. It started with a photograph. One image, published in Life magazine, showed a strange boat-shaped outline resting in the mountains of eastern Turkey. Most people would glance at it and move on without a second thought, but Wyatt didn't. He stared at it again and again, unable to let it go. What if that shape wasn't just a coincidence? What if it were Noah's Ark? That single question took hold of him and refused to let go. It became more than curiosity. It became a mission. And so began a 22-year search that would take him across continents in pursuit of physical evidence for biblical history. To his supporters, Wyatt was like a real-life Indiana Jones, less about adventure for fame and more about faith guiding the way. To his critics, he was a dreamer, chasing shadows, seeing patterns where none existed. But no matter how people viewed him, one thing was clear: he never gave up. Wyatt didn't think small. He set his sights on some of the most sacred and mysterious objects ever mentioned in the Bible. Over the years, he claimed to have discovered nearly 100 biblical relics. Among them were the Ark of the Covenant, Noah's Ark, Goliath's sword, the original stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, and even what he believed to be the dried blood of Jesus. For his followers, these claims were powerful, almost unbelievable in the best way. For the scientific community, they were deeply troubling. To some, Wyatt was a bold explorer, filling in the missing pieces of ancient history. To others, he was stepping far outside the boundaries of science, making claims that couldn't be verified or supported through proper methods. Still, whether praised or criticized, Wyatt pressed on. Part of what fueled his mission was the widespread nature of the flood story itself. The account of a great flood doesn't only appear in the Bible. Variations of it exist in nearly 200 cultures around the world, from the Middle East to the Americas, even to remote islands in the Pacific. It's one of humanity's most repeated stories. Destruction, survival, a new beginning. While scholars often debate whether these stories are symbolic or historical, Wyatt had already made up his mind. He believed the flood was real, and more importantly, he believed the evidence still existed, waiting to be found. For him, the Ark wasn't just a story. It was something physical, something built, something that could still be discovered. That belief led him back again and again to the same place, the boat-shaped formation in Turkey known as the Durupinar site. Starting in the late 1970s, Wyatt made repeated trips from the United States, treating each visit like something urgent, something he couldn't afford to delay. On site, he reported finding what he believed were strong clues. Pieces of petrified wood that he said matched ancient ship timbers, metal objects shaped like brackets, which he believed were once used to hold large wooden beams together, rock formations that resembled the rib structure of a massive vessel, and beneath the surface, patterns that seemed to suggest a man-made design rather than a natural formation.
This data does not represent natural geology. It's a man-made structure. These reflections are occurring very periodic, too periodic to be random, natural.
He also pointed to large standing stones found in nearby areas, massive slabs with holes carved near the top. Wyatt believed these could have served as anchor stones, used to stabilize a giant ship during violent waters. To him, everything was lining up. The size matched the biblical description. The structure made sense. The surrounding evidence supported the idea. After years of research, travel, and documentation, Wyatt became convinced. In his mind, he had found the Ark that generations had only dreamed about. But outside his circle of supporters, the reaction was very different. Professional archaeologists and geologists strongly disagreed with his conclusions. Many argued that the Durupinar Formation was entirely natural, a geological feature shaped by erosion, pressure, and shifting earth over time. They also raised concerns about Wyatt's methods. He had no formal training in archaeology, and his findings were not always documented in ways that allowed independent verification. At times, he relied on personal interpretation where scientific standards required strict evidence. Some critics believed he was seeing what he wanted to see, fitting natural patterns into a biblical narrative. Others were more sympathetic, viewing him as sincere but mistaken. But Wyatt's supporters saw it differently. They believed he wasn't rejected because he was wrong, but because his discoveries challenged established thinking. In their view, institutions weren't ready to accept findings that could reshape both scientific understanding and religious belief. And so, the debate continued. Was he a pioneer uncovering hidden truth, or a man led too far by belief? Whatever the answer, Wyatt's story refused to fade. And he wasn't alone. For centuries, stories have circulated about something hidden in those mountains. Travelers, pilots, and explorers have all reported strange sightings, wooden shapes beneath snow, unusual structures seen from the air, and outlines that looked too precise to be natural, whispers that never fully disappeared. Wyatt believed those whispers pointed to something real, and he was determined to prove it. What are your thoughts about the discoveries inside Noah's Ark? Let us know in the comments section below. In the end, this story isn't just about what may have been found in Turkey. It's about the mysteries of our past that we still don't fully understand. Whether truth, belief, or something in between, questions like these keep history alive. If you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more real-life mysteries.